Hartington. I'm a developer at a company called Ionic. We do a lot with hybrid mobile, cross-platform, UI libraries. If any of that is of interest to you, let's chat afterwards. We're going to be focusing on this topic called Angular builders. It is an underlying concept inside of the Angular ecosystem. It is what powers most of the Angular CLI. We're going to look at how it operates and how you can actually customize it to fit your own needs. If you do have any questions, or if you have any photos that you take of me while I'm giving a presentation and I'm looking like I'm PowerPointing to something, feel free to tag me, M. Hartington. Love to know what you think of the talk. So yes, have you heard about Ionic? Don't worry, this is not about Ionic if you have no idea what it is. We are talking about builders. Now, builders are a thing in Angular that are kind of abstracted away from your day-to-day. You're not necessarily interacting or calling these concepts or these packages or tools. You interface it through the CLI. Now, the CLI, whenever you do an ng build, it's going to call a builder. They operate on this real simple principle of give a set of options, run this function. And I would argue that it's probably the most important and best feature in the Angular ecosystem, one that doesn't exist in, say, the Vue ecosystem or even in the React ecosystem. We'll take a look at why that is, but I will die on that hill. So, what is our first builder? Well, if you've ever run ng build during your app and you're deploying it, congratulations, you are working with the browser builder. This is going to go through, compile your app to something that could run in the browser, transform all of that HTML into some kind of JavaScript syntax that can be interpreted. If you've run ng serve before, congratulations, you've run another builder called the dev server. It's going to set up Webpack dev server. It's going to serve all your assets, watch for changes, and then reload the page as those changes are coming in. If you've run ng tests, hopefully you can sense a pattern here. Congratulations, you've run the test builder. Historically, that has been something like Protractor. More recently, it's probably something like Jest, testing library, Cypress, various testing solutions, but they all operate with a builder behind the scenes, setting up all of the options and all of the ways that that builder can perform tasks against your workspace. Said there, a simple principle, given a set of options, run a function, and then return what those results are. That could be a one-time call, it could be a called multiple times and return as a stream. So it doesn't matter how those function results are returned, it should return something. So we see these every day, and this is probably where most Angular developers are used to kind of seeing what a builder is. We have our Angular workspace where we have this collection of what they call architects. Really high level, if we think about what an actual architect does, they design something, they set up the plans and set up all of the requirements that the builder or the contractors in any kind of construction agency work off of and actually execute. So we have our architect for the task build. Inside of that, we have the builder, which is the function that we are going to call. We have our options that get passed. These can be, we can skip certain options if we don't want, and the builder will internalize what are all of the complete options. And then we have overrides for different kind of configurations. If we're doing a build in CI, maybe we don't want to enable certain things. If we are doing a production build, enable optimizations, minify everything, get rid of all of comments. All those options can be overridden based on what type of build we are performing. So let's go ahead and make a builder. It's going to be really fun, I promise you. But answer the question, why do we even want to make a builder? It can be important to realize that not everyone is going to have a need to write their own custom builder. 90% of the time, there's going to be a solution that exists out there, and you won't have to write it, hopefully. But when you're in a situation and you need to know how this concept and how these tools work, you want to know how to write them. Maybe if you want to submit a pull request, or maybe you need to actually fork something because of your own company's needs. You would just want to take an existing builder, fork it, make those changes. You still need to understand how that process works. If you have custom tools that you would like to include, for instance, an image optimization build process, you could call an image optimization tool that'll go ahead, scan through all your assets or some glob pattern, and actually generate the appropriate size images for various screen width, or just minify your images to begin with. Also, probably the cooler reason, it can be a really nice sell to your manager. It's like, I understand how the Angular build system works. I am a true 10x developer. It's not really going to work that way, but you can hope that your manager believes you that you are now a 10x dev. So we're going to look at some code. We're not really going to be thinking about this as if we're programming with Angular. We're actually going to think about this as if we're just doing standard node development. They're actually going to be using the same tools. We're going to be having access to all of Node's internal modules. So our knowledge of Angular, not really needed that much, that's pretty nice. There are various ways that we could set up this project and scaffold everything out. Real simple one, make a directory, cd into it, npm install init-y. You'll get an empty package JSON, and you can start configuring it and installing the dependencies that you need. I have a demo that we're going to be looking at that is using NX as a monorepo. NX offers their own node tooling and solutions. You can use that if you want. You could use Lerna, you could use NPM workspaces, however you want. There's no prescribed way of doing this, which is also good and also kind of less than ideal. So if we have our kind of standard setup, we have a package JSON, we got a list of dependencies, we have a name, some version number. The first step that we want to do is actually tell the Angular CLI that we, as a package, have a collection of builders, and we would like those to be publicly available for the Angular CLI to call. So we add this little entry into our package JSON, says builders, and then point it to a JSON file. That JSON file actually contains all of the builders that we want to publicly make available. In this case, we're going to have one called command builder. Now, the implementation field is going to be the actual function. It's going to export something as a default, and Angular CLI is just going to call that. We have a list of available options called a schema. These could contain options that you want to publicly expose. You could have required fields on it, a whole bunch of different things that you could do in here. And then, because we are good developers, we are going to give it a clear description that is going to show what its intended purpose is. So, just to make sure that we're clear on how this all works, we have the package JSON up at top, we have the builders.json in the middle, and then we have that builder field from our angular.json. We take the package name and then the builder name, and that is how the lookup ends up working. So bionic/builders, that is our package. We're going to include that on line 17. And then we have a colon, and then this is the builder that I want to run. So all of this is just a real simple lookup, and once that happens, we call the implementation. Fairly straightforward lookup here. So I have stepped through examples that we can do here, but I'm actually going to switch to my editor, so that way we can actually take a look at this in real life. So don't care too much about the editor I'm using. I do like to use Vim. You don't need to. Use VS Code. It's probably better for you. In here, I have a scaffold out function. It's called It's called command builder. And then I have my default export being this function called create builder. Now, create builder is provided by the Angular tooling. We have this package called Angular Dev Kit Architect, which is all of our high-level operations that we want to call. We have create builder, which is just going to set up some additional resources for us and provide things like the current context in which the CLI is running. It's also going to pass along those options that we have listed in the Angular JSON. So in this function, we're going to call command builder. Command builder is going to get some options. So this could be things like a command where it's going to be a string, could be just any package that we want to call, and then an array of arguments that we want to pass along to that command. So we're going to first import child process because we're going to just do some shell scripting real quick. We're going to create our process, just going to spawn something and then use the command and then the options.arg. So we're just going to pass those arguments all the way to our process, standard IO. We will get the data. We can just say on data, use the context.logger. So the Angular CLI provides its own logging solution. You can have obviously console.info, but you could also have console.warn, console.error, or logger.warn, logger.error. Works fairly similar to standard node logging systems. So we'll just print all that data out, and then we're actually going to return a promise here. We'll say, when the process is closed, we are going to resolve with an object here that's going to say the success is going to equal the exit code. So if it's 0, which is kind of standard command line tools, that means it's been successful. So let's just format that real quick. So that's saved. I have over here the same, another Angular project. It's consuming these builders. I can open up, say, my angular.json, and I have my builder listed here. So command builder is our entry. So if we wanted to call this, we would just say ng run app:command builder. We are going to pass the options. First, we're going to run it in, say, the default mode. It's just going to list out all the files for us. Fairly simple. Next one is we could do a different command all in itself. We could do something like cowsay, and then pass in a argument with a single entry saying builders are cool. So we'll do ng run app command build. Command build or command builder? Yeah. So command build, it just did ls-la. So it's just going to list out all the files. Fairly simple, not doing a whole lot, but we're getting the concepts down. Let's do that same command again, and we're going to pass in production. So we're going to run a different setup all in itself, and it's going to print out a little cow that says builders are cool. So now we have the options of understanding how the commands are passed in, how the arguments are passed in and parsed out, what kind of tools we have available, success of that. We get the rough idea of how all this works, and we could just echo out anything really we want to put in that field. So what if we want to take this step further and actually do something a little bit more advanced? Probably customizing Webpack. Does that sound interesting? It sounds very terrifying to me because Webpack is just a mysterious black box where things go in and I have no idea how they are processed, but code comes out, and that's all I really care about. So let's customize our builder to include a way for us to extend Webpack in a very safe and sure way that we know it's not going to break. So I have this extend builder package, and let's look at the schema for this. So this schema is going to say, hey, Angular JSON or Angular developers, you need to provide this browser target. So this is going to be the actual task or the actual builder we want to really call. We're just going to create a facade around this. We're going to actually call the default one and customize it a little bit. So to do so, we're going to have our standard kind of setup. We have a function, we have create builder, we have some types up here that we are importing. Not really important about the imports at the moment, but let's start modifying this. So we have this thing called target from target string. Basically, what we can do is get the actual specification for our project. What is the, we can do a little hover. We are basically going to get the project name and then the actual task. So we really just want to get, say, the default browser builder or whatever our users have set. And then we are going to do some work to figure out the rest of the details. So in here, we're just going to call fork join because we are going to take two promises that have now been converted to observables to figure out the other options that we have here. So get target options. This is going to go ahead and say, go and look at all the options that you have been passed, then validate that against the schema that the builder author has provided. So if I say my builder is going to run on port 4200, that's the default that has been provided deep inside of Angular's own schema file. If I wanted to override that, we're just going to take the option that we already have and just compare it and say, okay, I want this one from the user. I want these three from the built-in that I've already provided default values. From here, we can say, or get me the name. So it's going to be the actual name of the builder. In this case, it's Angular devkit / browser builder. Now from this, we are going to validate everything, make sure that we are doing not actually passing in invalid options. All of this just gets returned once we have the options and name. And then we can do this concat map to switch to this new observable, which is extend builder. So this extend builder is going to call execute browser builder, which is the built-in Angular function. So it's going to go in, it's going to call whatever Webpack functionality we want to provide. And we're also going to go ahead and use some currying to say, hey, I want to override this existing browser builder. I'm going to pass in some new options, and I'm also going to pass in the existing context because the lower level builder needs to know this stuff. So let's go ahead and implement the extend builder. So this extend builder gets a builder as a argument, and then we go ahead and return the options and context that we pass in at the second half of the query, and then we say return that builder and call it, pass in the options and the context, and then we have this third argument where we could say pass in the Webpack configuration. We get this whole list of options in here that are saying, I want the Webpack config, let's modify it. Now I have this old config that gets returned, and then I just want to return it once I'm done modifying it. So what are some fun Webpack plugins out there? It's all right, you don't need to answer because it's going to be a Nyan cat, which is always fun to include, and anytime I get to show that off, it's very fun. So all we're really doing is just grabbing the plugins object, or plugins array, yeah, it's array, and then we're just going to push a new Webpack plugin. So if you have an existing Webpack plugin for, said, image asset optimizations, you could push that in there and configure it to your heart's content. Then once that's done, we return the old config, and everything's good. We are basically, don't try to type with one hand, Mike. We are basically done with that. So we'll just do a quick little format, save. Let's go back over to our editor and open up the Angular JSON again, we have our extend builder. So we're going to call the builder itself in our builders field at bionic/builders :extend build. We are going to give it the option of the actual builder that we want to call and where we want to get all of our options from, which is our default build process. So with all of that set up, we can also modify that to include our production. So let's run this. So we'll do ng run app extend build, and we're just going to run that, and we have a pretty little cat just being printed out. It's totally useless. It's not going to change your build speed. It's not going to improve your life, but it does put a smile on my face, and that's all I really care about. Who doesn't want to have a little bit more fun when they're watching their builds complete? It's been a rough couple years. So cool. That is extending a existing builder. We could do the production build for this again. This isn't a very large app, so the build times won't be that dramatic, but we can still get the same process. We could customize what plugins that we are going to pass in based on the production and based on that configuration. We could be saying, hey, go ahead and if I'm in a dev build, do this setup. If I'm in a production build, do this setup. And it's going to swap those out intelligently. What's really fun is that if you wanted to take this approach a step further, instead of just passing in the builder itself, you could give it a file as an option, which is a Webpack config. So if you aren't sure what extensions you want to include, you could have that builder read that Webpack config and then merge it in with the provided one from the Angular CLI. And now you have a little bit more control, and it's a little bit more granular. You could say, all right, in this project, I am going to include these plugins, but in this project, I'm only going to include one of them. And it's portable. It's a lot more efficient than just hard coding everything. So that is our extend build. And the last builder I do want to show is going to extend the built-in server. So for whatever reason, if we want to customize how your app gets served, we can do that. Same setup as before. We have our create builder, passing it this extend dev server, which is our real function. We're going to get a few things here. We're going to say, give me the dev server target, what actual builder that we want to run for our dev server. We can pass in a port, host, SSL if we want to enable that. We'll get those options from the Angular JSON, and then we will also get the root of our workspace. So what directory are we operating from? This time we're going to use a different approach than just saying fork join. We're going to use this async function called setup. This is probably the more standard, in air quotes, way of doing it. It's how the Angular CLI team has been setting up a lot of their builders. It's how kind of the ecosystem of Angular tooling developers have chosen to go and having this setup function. It's going to work the same way as just having a new observable that you start from. But in this setup, we are going to get the target options again. We are going to get the builder name. We are going to actually validate everything one more time. We're going to modify all those options that have been returned with whatever we have passed into our own settings. And then we're going to do some modifications to the actual project. We're going to prepare a server config where we're going to include some more resources. And if we actually look at this, all we're really doing is going through and we're going to include some resources for a WebSocket. So we're just going to write all this to our to a file, and then we're going to start to include this into the Angular's asset script in its asset and script entry in the angular.json. So we're doing this in memory. It's not going to be permanent, and we could always undo it later on. Then we're going to call create console log server. If we go to the implementation, nope, no, don't do GF. Oh no. Okay, here we go. This await create console log server, all we're really doing is creating this new WebSocket connection where as we get data coming in, we're just going to use the we're going to use child process to actually print that out and use all of WebSocket's APIs to print this out to our terminal. This is stuff that we actually do in Ionic, and it actually has a lot of really nice use cases. We'll look at one after we're done with this setup. So once we've created the assets and we've created our log server, we're going to return those formatted options and then the new assets. We're going to use from to set up our implementation. Inside of there, we're going to use switch map instead of concat map because a dev server is going to constantly return new results. So we want to keep that observable alive and not have it complete. Once we're in there, we're going to call execute dev server builder, which is the built-in dev server from Angular. Instead of using currying in this implementation, we are just going to call a function that says get transforms, where we pass in the context and then the formatted assets. And then our get transforms returns an object where we have the Webpack configuration, which calls another function, and then index.html to rewrite our index.html that the user has provided. The Webpack config transform is just going to go ahead, call the existing transform, and we're going to basically do some Webpack configuration that we did in the previous example. All we're doing here is just going ahead and taking the assets that we've created that are now just a script, input, output in a workspace, and we are just going to include them using this new scripts Webpack plugin, which is provided from Angular. Once we're done with that, we will just push those to the original config, and then we're good in the Webpack transforms. From the index transforms, we're actually going to use this function called augment index.html. This is one that I wrote. All it really does is grab Cheerio and do some DOM manipulation on our index file. If we actually want to look at what it is, it's not anything fancy. Don't expect to be blown away by it. We literally just append a script to the HTML, and it's going to include the actual logger system that we have in our create logging system. So this is all the asset is doing. We then return the HTML once it's done, and it's pretty much complete from there. We just return the promise when that's all completed because it's asynchronous. So all of this is pretty much done. So we have our entire builder. Let's see, we'll do a quick little zoom out, see where we're at. 118 lines, some utilities, a lot of imports here at the top level. It might seem overwhelming, but if you've done any kind of node development before, it's fairly similar. We're just dealing with a bunch of object manipulations and just passing data around. So let's go ahead and actually run that builder just to make sure. Let's check the Angular JSON, see what the actual setup looks for this. We have extend server. We are passing in that builder again. Our options that we are going to pass, we're going to actually call app serve, so our default server. We're going to pass the same port, 4200. We are going to change the host from, instead of being localhost, we're going to open it up to 0.0.0. So that way we actually can make it available to, say, a device that you don't always want to install the dev tools for. So I'm on iOS. Remote debugging for iOS is notoriously not great. You can kind of get somewhere closer there with this setup. Like I said, this is stuff that we do in Ionic right now, and it is surprisingly a game changer. I didn't think it was going to be that cool, but apparently a lot of people do. So we'll do run app extend serve. We're going to get some warnings printed out because security issues, don't really worry about it. All it really is that you change the host from localhost to 000. Now, I have my browser over here loaded up on my phone. You can already see that we have console.info being printed out. And let's go ahead and do some adjustment. I have the phone over here connected. Yeah, that's me. Let's go ahead and actually just press this button. Oh, I'm just logging out the value to the console. If I'm going ahead and say, what is it? app.component.ts. Yeah, don't worry about it. Console.foo. Hello from the demo. Save, we'll get all the information passed back. And we still have that thing printing out to the log. So for instance, if you're doing a form submission and you want to actually make sure that you are printing out or sending the right information, or that you are catching the errors, you can log that out. Your device doesn't even need to be connected, and to prove it, let's just quit this. I'm not even connected, I'm just on the same network, and through the power of WebSockets, it still works. So this is actually pretty useful for people who maybe you are on a Windows device and you have an iPhone that you need to test on, or an iPhone or an iOS only bug. You can kind of get close to figuring out and catching the errors and just being able to test it. So that's a little bit more advanced because we're doing a lot of script manipulation. It works, it's great. Maybe you want to include it. The source code is all available. So let's go back to my slides, and I'll show you a little bit behind the scenes of all the stuff that we did do. And skip. So here we go. So we're kind of wrapping up. We'll kind of look at what we've learned, how this can be applied, why you should care. Builders themselves can range from being very simple to complex. We saw the command builder, it just printed out whatever you pass in as arguments. We saw one that is extending all of the transforms that Angular provides. You don't really need to do that all the time. Probably shouldn't really do that all the time, but you could. The tricky thing that I learned when I was building these builders is I didn't know what I needed, and I didn't know what I didn't know, which is always a pain. It's always a difficult thing to kind of resolve, because where do you begin? I need to do this, and I need to modify this stuff. I have no resources to kind of base this off of. Great resources that I had available to me, I have access to the Angular team. Not everyone has access to the Angular team, but you at least have access to the stuff that they wrote. So the dev kit package inside of the Angular CLI repo, full of builders, full of quality implementations. There's types that you can follow. It's going to be a bit of trial by error though, trial and error. So you try one thing, realize, nope, that didn't work, go back to the drawing board, do some changes, hopefully it resolves. The dev kit build Angular browser, the default browser that we have, it's around 400 lines of code, split up into multiple imports and packages. There's types in there. You have a lot of resources to say, how do I actually understand how this thing works? And if you even go onto GitHub and go through the package, you can start to hover over all those types and get some of the details in there without even having to clone the repo. So this can be really great to just kind of understand how it all works, how these pieces come together, and if you do need to go down that road of building your own, you have a good resource and way to look at it. And did I mention that there's types? Without those types, I think this would have been a lot more difficult to actually build out, but with the types, I was actually able to understand it. There's some really great examples from the Angular community if you would like to see what others have done. Minko Gishev has his basically the command builder that we built up on GitHub as a way to show people how they work. There is this ecosystem called Angular Builders, which has a custom Webpack where you can just provide a Webpack file, and we'll go ahead and merge that in with the built-in one from Angular. Manfred, I'm going to butcher his last name, so I won't even attempt it. Angular Manfred, who does everything with Angular and is probably the second smartest person next to the Angular core team, has his own little mini ecosystem with this NGX Build Plus. He's created this whole hook system where you can have a Webpack that happens beforehand, a Webpack that happens concurrently, and a Webpack that happens after. He's gone and done a whole lot of stuff with this. He's also done one where you can set up module federation from Webpack 5. So he has that base NGX Build Plus. Great resource, definitely worth looking at, and it's actually pretty easy to understand once you get in there and you figure out what pieces are doing what. Now, I don't think I touched on it, but builders don't actually have to build your code, which is a very misleading name. You could actually have a builder that just calls a CLI tool and publishes your project. So these folks from Angular Schule, which is a training consultancy out in, I believe it's Austria, they have this one where you can just say, when you commit this code, probably part of CI, you can go ahead and run this builder, which will publish all of your project to GitHub pages. There's various ones for Firebase, there's various ones for Netlify, Vercel. All these can just be done via actions and call the appropriate tools that are needed. I would have a missed opportunity if I didn't tout the one that I wrote. This is one that we have for Ionic. It does the dev server. It does the builder where we're modifying all those assets. So these are things that I actually have to know and maintain, and millions of people actually use these packages. So it's doing something right, and it's actually pretty useful to a lot of them. So first, probably understand, is a builder something that you need? Chances are no. If you are in the minority that needs a builder, you should learn how they work. Hopefully this talk at least gives you some ideas, but the resources are probably going to be more valuable because those are actually kept up to date and actually used by people. There's multiple ways to do a builder itself. You don't always have to follow the same setup that everyone else does. Mine don't always follow how Angular does it, and sometimes it's just easier to copy and paste and replace what I need. Like any Node program, there's going to be multiple ways to do it, and they're all valid. So kind of pick one and just go with it, and then figure out if you actually need to integrate external tools and make it just part of the Angular CLI process. Definitely can be helpful. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them, but if not, thank you so much. So, are there any questions? No. Oh, okay, we got one.
So you had an example where the builder was launching a child process, where you have a simple LS can launch let's say a fake server so that your Angular application can connect to that server, sort of like a wait on that server before.
Right. So the question is, can a builder just create its own server or like something else? Yeah. If it's possible in, say, a Node process, you can do that. Better question is, should you? You can do whatever you want, but maybe figure out, is that something that you need? You could have it so that way you are running multiple services at the same time, and just feeding the information from those two observables, be it the dev server and then your actual server under the hood. Maybe you want to run your own proxy server while you're actually building it, and then you are just mapping back to those results. I'm guessing that's kind of what you were thinking about. Yeah, it's theoretically possible. You just have to wire up how that server gets created, and then being able to feed the output from that API into your app somehow. So theoretically, yes, you could. Any other questions? All right, you are all free to go. Thank you.